but I will never work for organizations or companies that go against my own values, such as oil companies, any polluting industries or meat industry or anything that smells of reactionary and then right-wing ideology.
So, welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Eyeshot 50mm. And today we're sitting down with Nick Annes. Nick Annes is a Belgian documentary photographer whose work offers a sharp and often ironic view and reflection on contemporary society. Nick Annes explores themes such as globalization, mass tourism, consumerism, as well as the tensions between individuals and the systems they inhabit. So, Nick, welcome and thank you for being with us. Okay, so the very first question is, who is Nick Annes according to Nick Annes?
I'm a photographer. I live in Antwerp, Belgium. I've been a photographer my entire adult life. I started as a photojournalist, but in the past 15 years, I mainly work on long-term documentary projects on contemporary socio-political issues with books and exhibitions as my main output. And besides being a photographer, I'm also a teacher at the Academy of Fine Arts in Ghent, Belgium.
And how did you start photographing? Was there a specific moment or a phase in your life that made you realize, yes, this is the path I want to follow?
My father had a camera that I experimented with as a teenager in the late 80s. And then later on, I built a darkroom in the bathroom of my grandmother. I think I was just lucky enough to find a hobby that suited me very well. Then later, when I started to study photography at the academy, the Arts Academy in Ghent, things got more serious. We were encouraged to go outside our comfort zone and connect with strangers. And actually, 30 years later, I'm still doing that.
And do you remember the very first photo you took? Was it, first of all, a masterpiece, a disaster? And which photo made you actually think, yes, I am a photographer?
Well, I can't remember what the very first photo was that I took, but it all started with nature photography. Flowers, birds, butterflies, landscapes. I used to be a bird watcher back then. First photos that I took that made me feel like a photographer were black and white photos that I made in Paris in the 90s. Around that time, I had seen an exhibition of Robert Doisneau in Arles, 1994, I think it was. And this positive joie de vivre in his photos really appealed on me. And I tried to photograph similar scenes of street musicians in Paris or people sitting on a bench drinking wine, things like that.
How much did the city, the upbringing, the environment you grew up have an influence on your photography?
A photographic vision is not something that you acquire all of a sudden. It's the result of a long and intensive process of many years of photography. I grew up in a small town near Antwerp, and my parents and my ancestors were hardworking beer brewers and sellers. They weren't particularly interested in art or photography, but they allowed me to study at the Art Academy, for which I'm very grateful to them. But there was another important influence when I was young that shaped me as a person. In my village, there was an alternative youth center where I used to go every weekend and where I got in touch with good music, a lot of punk music with bands such as the Stooges and the Dead Kennedys, Mudhoney, The X, Sonic Youth. And these bands I still like up to this day. I think this do-it-yourself mentality of the punk movement made me realize that you shouldn't wait for someone to ask you to take action, but it's better to take the initiative by yourself.
Now let's talk a little bit about method, visual language approach, and everything that regards your photography. So my first question would be, when you are out in a scene, what are you looking for? Are there recurring elements? Are there specific indications that make you feel, okay, this is the perfect place where I am right now and I want to shoot it? How does it work?
I'm often triggered by a particular setting, an urban landscape or a striking building, and that is often the start of a more layered photograph. I try to combine that backdrop with human activity, which I usually encounter by chance. It's just a matter of probability. The longer I walk, the higher the chance I will find something.
We know you're not a street photographer in a classic sense of the term, but rather a documentary photographer who works in public spaces. How would you then define your own photographic approach?
My photographic approach is not rigid. Every situation is different and requires a specific approach. Sometimes the location is more important, sometimes the focus is more on the people. It's very organic, and as a result, my work contains elements of street photography, portraiture, photojournalism, documentary. The borders between those genres are blurred. It is all useful as long as it contributes to the content. Because my work is very content driven, it reflects on topics such as migration, urbanization, globalization, or the commodification of our society. It doesn't focus on individual stories, but it rather takes a look at the bigger picture, how we humans shape our world, how we sometimes destroy it, and how we relate to our environment. A lot of my work, a lot of my motivation and subject choices come from a concern about the social and ecological state our world is in.
How important is for you imperfections? How important are imperfections for you? Do you try to always find perfect element or do you let yourself be guided by the moment?
I maintain high technical standards. A sharpness and detail are important. A large depth of field, a well balanced composition, good lighting, flash if necessary. And these aesthetics serve to entice the viewer, to drawing them closer and inviting them to look carefully. Because beyond these aesthetics, there is often a narrative layer that's part of a statement or a message or an opinion that I want to convey. These high technical standards do not prevent me from letting myself be guided by the moment. I don't think so. Even with fast momentary events, I strive for technical perfection.
And talking about inspirations instead, which artists or photographers have influenced the way you see the world and how you do photography and why?
A variety of photographers and artists have influenced me for different reasons. I will name a few. The photographers of the new topographics who shifted their focus from the natural romanticized landscape to these deckpan urban and suburban landscapes. And among them, Stephen Shore really stands out for me, both for his landscape photos in uncommon places as his snapshots in American services. Just like him, I think the outskirts of a city are much more interesting than the center of a city or the historical center, because in the outskirts, that's where the urban dynamics and the spirit of their times are most visible. And then we must not forget the late Martin Parr, who had a major influence on my work, both for his visual language and the humor and the irony in it, as for his subject choices on entertainment, consumerism, and tourism. In painting, I think Peter Bruegel the Elder is very inspiring for photographers. The way he composes his landscapes, he paints from an observer's point of view, outside the action, slightly elevated, looking at the world as if it were a theater stage with actors and extras moving around. And in film, I like Chahtati a lot. Um, I like those very tight, well thought out compositions and the humor in his films. He also makes very spatial compositions. Architecture plays a big role, and the positioning of the actors is very precise.
And for you, how important is the element of surprise? Do you always try to be surprised and surprise, or do you direct the scene, but not in the sense of directing subjects, themselves, but research a place and go there with a specific conscious and knowledge?
This depends on the situation. When I photograph in a dynamic situation, a nightclub in Dubai, for instance, it's all about being hyper concentrated, acting fast to get that moment. But in general, my photos are the result of a combination of research and chance. Research is necessary to determine my field of action, where I need to go. And once on location, that's when chance and coincidence come in. Surprise is a very important reason for me to include a photo in a project, but more in the sense of, is this a surprising image or have we seen this before? I try to avoid stereotypical imagery, images that somehow belong to our collective memory and that we as photographers unconsciously imitate.
How has your approach to photography changed over the years? Was there a turning point, or do you feel it's the same?
I evolved from a typical photojournalist who prefers to be in the middle of the action to a more observing perspective, to a photographer who is more likely to take a step back in order to show more context. My photos also became calmer in composition without the visual acrobatics of my early years. When I was young, I wanted to show what I was capable of with my camera, and now I want to show what I think. Over the years, my photos also became more ambiguous, I think, and more open to interpretation. I no longer feel the urge to provide or to give answers or try to give answers, but rather to ask questions about the state our world is in. And the turning point for me was a year-long round trip through the former Soviet Union in 2006, 2007, resulting in my first book, Red Journey. I traveled very slowly overland with public transport from Antwerp to Vladivostok and back without taking airplanes. I didn't stay anywhere for long, so I didn't have the opportunity to bond with people. I felt like an outsider the whole time, and I started to see things differently. I think I was liberated from my journalistic reflexes and I started to photograph more intuitively and more freely. During that trip, I'm sure the foundation of my style and my visual approach were laid very organically just by taking lots of photographs.
And if you could give your younger self an advice, going back in time and give your younger self an advice, what would it be?
I'm fairly happy with where I am now and with the choices I have made in the past. But sometimes I wonder, what if I had gone to live abroad in the Middle East, for instance, or in Istanbul, where I worked a lot when I was in my 20s? Of course, I will never know because the uniqueness of life does not give us a second chance to find out.
Speaking instead a little bit more on the technicalities, the gears, and everything, how do you approach editing? What's your approach to editing? Do you try to keep your photos as raw as possible? How does it work?
When I travel, I quickly review my photographs in the evening at the hotel, but I don't edit. It's just the reassurance of what I already have and what still needs to be done. It's also a technical check. Once home, I process a large selection of photographs, and the further I go into the project, the more the selection is narrowed down. When making a book, a certain consistency is required in the final selection, both in terms of aesthetics and style, as well as content. The best photos that meet these criteria are included in the book. Of course, there are also photos that are good enough for other purposes, for the media, for instance. I work with Panos Photo Agency in London, which has thousands of photographs of mine in their database for media usage.
And what makes you decide a specific photograph over another one?
If two photographs are very similar, it is only in the minor details, like facial expressions or avoiding messy overlap of elements or avoiding distracting elements that do not contribute to the content of the image.
And if you have, could you share with us your personal definition of a successful photo?
Simply put, when form and content are in perfect harmony, and apart from the technical aspects that I mentioned earlier. For me, a good photo is surprising, ambiguous, somewhat confusing, and disruptive, but at the same time, well composed, nice to look at, communicative, open, or accessible for a wide audience. A photo that evokes the reaction, what the hell is going on here? But these photos are rare and hard to make.
We've said so far that you've been traveling and shooting places that have certain troubling social context or background or political dynamics working on. So, my question is, has it ever happened to you that one of your photo was completely misinterpreted from what you wanted to give it in the first place?
I have no problem with there being different interpretations of an image. On the contrary, it proves the complexity of the photograph. It happens that people do not read the social critique that I put in my work as such. In Garden of Delight, for instance, my book about Dubai, there are people that, after seeing the photos, still want to go on vacation to Dubai, which is not exactly what I meant. Once I made a reportage about entertainment and life on board of a cruise ship, and the cruise company was very happy that these photographs were published in a Belgian magazine, although they were not exactly or not at all promotional images. So this proves, I think, that people judge photographs based on their own frame of reference, their own life experiences, and probably also their own social political reality. There is no such thing as a universal photograph.
Do you think awards, books, exhibitions are a way to validate the creative process of a photographer, or they do not matter?
Sure, recognition and awards are very important because they motivate me to continue. But it should not become the goal. Publishing a book is always struggle, but once it's done, it's very satisfying because the book remains and the project is complete and people have it on their shelves.
In your work, street and documentary photography often overlap. How do you personally perceive the boundaries between the two, or they do not have boundaries?
I don't see a boundary between these two genres in my work. I don't consider myself a street photographer, but rather a documentary photographer. And if a dynamic photograph that I made in the street fits the story, I'll be glad to include it in the series.
There is this thing that some say that street photography is art and documentary photography is information. Do you agree with this definition?
No, I don't agree at all. I'm not going to define what is art and what isn't, or state that what I'm doing is art, but documentary, as I see it, is much more than information. It's very personal and very subjective. It's not photojournalism, with all my respect. Documentary photography is a way or a language to express a feeling or make a statement. With my photography, I do not claim to proclaim the truth, but rather a highly personal opinion.
Is there a difference between telling a story and documenting a moment? And if so, how would you explain it?
There are two ways to look at it. The simple answer is that a story is a collection of moments, of many moments, many single images put in a sequence. But it's also possible to tell a story in one single frame. And to achieve this, a photograph must suggest more than it literally shows. A photography, documentary photography, arises from reality, but can also transcend it. And that is when a photograph begins to tell its own story.
And do you think that street photography must always be spontaneous, or is it acceptable to direct your subjects?
I think every photographer has to decide that for themselves, but they should be open about their working methods and honest. If you stage your photos, no problem, but don't fool your viewers and tell them that it's candid. Then there's also a difference, or there are different levels of staging. Asking permission to photograph a scene is not staging. Telling people what to do or where to stand, that is staging. In my own work, I'm not staging. Not because I'm against staging, but because staging would kill all the fun and the excitement and the magic that I feel when I manage to make a good photograph. I'm a big fan of chance and the unexpected. What happens in the real world is often much stranger and more surprising than I could ever imagine myself.
Having been part of photography collective like In Public, how important is dialogue with other photographers for personal growth?
Dialogue is important, just as it is important to go to exhibitions and lectures of other photographers. In my own practice, I am mainly a solo worker. I do everything by myself, from research to logistics, post production, putting the work out in the world. I don't have an assistant. It's only in the final phase of the book production that I show the work to some of my colleagues or yet to solve the last doubts. I'm also open for feedback from curators and book designers. And I'm a regular participant to photo festivals in Europe, but also further away. These events are an excellent opportunity for dialogue. You spend several days with the same people, experiences and stories are exchanged not only during portfolio reviews or exhibition openings, but also just over a pint of beer on a sunny terrace.
So today, street photography is everywhere online, on TikTok, Instagram, everywhere. And the genre is hugely popular at the moment. Do you think this overexposure could trivialize the genre, or could it actually improve it or make it more accessible to others?
This counts for everything: films, music, arts in general. Today, there are many more opportunities to showcase your work than when I was young. And that's a positive thing. But on the other hand, it's more difficult to stand out and make a difference in this abundance of images and image makers. It is therefore very important to remain true to your own wishes and your own dreams and not to simply follow what is hot or trendy or popular today or just follow the market. The number of likes on Instagram is not a good indicator for the quality of photograph.
In an era dominated by algorithms designed to eliminate the unexpected, serendipity, let's say, it could be seen as a political act. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree. Street photography and documentary is a type of photography that is very labor intensive, very time consuming, and the outcome is often unpredictable. It does not correspond to the neoliberal ideal of efficiency and profit making, and therefore it's a political act.
Is there a photography book that you've worn out or that have left you a huge impression, and why?
One of the first photo books that I bought when I was a student was Moving Out exhibition catalog by Robert Frank, with an overview of his career and looking at his later work in which he scratches his negatives and paints texts onto his photographs. It was one of those rare moments that photography had an emotional effect on me, especially his personal photographs of his family, his wife, his children, these photographs that carry enormous weight, moments of pain and pleasure. There is this blurry black and white photograph of a field of daisies with the text "Pour la fille" scratched into the print for his daughter Andrea, who died in a plane crash. It's so simple but so powerful. This really, really moved me.
Now, I want to discuss some of the most hot topics in street and documentary photography. And the very first question that I have for you is, where do you think the boundary lies between observation and invasion of privacy in photography?
Observation is neutral, invasion sounds negative. And I think the line between the two is blurred and shifts from situation to situation. Sometimes it is necessary to push the boundary a little bit to get that specific photo. But if people make it clear that they don't want to be photographed, then I stop. If I continue in that case, I am being invasive. So if you often get angry reactions while photographing, you're crossing the line, and you should probably reconsider your approach in that case. Photography is a difficult balance between guts and respect. Being too bold will lead to conflict. Being too mindful of possible consequences will paralyze you. So being photographer is much more difficult than making photographs.
So, photographing people, is it still ethically acceptable compared to other years before, or not?
Yes, it's still fine. Public spaces belong to everyone, including photographers. It is perfectly legal to photograph in the street, provided you use common sense, are empathic, have good social skills. You will rarely encounter any problems. Most people are perfectly happy to be photographed. If you behave like an arrogant and disrespectful hunter, don't expect people to be nice to you. The same goes for taking sneaky photographs. That's not a good idea either. It's better to clearly show that you're a photographer, to be open and honest, to be self confident but friendly. And if a discussion arises, explain what you are doing. Never run away unless your life is in danger. Again, I think thinking too much about what is ethically acceptable will work paralyzing. And besides, once a photograph has been made, you can always decide whether or not you publish it.
Is there anything in today's photography scenes that you find exaggerated, hypocritical, or simply overrated?
Something that really bothers me is the sometimes disdainful attitude of certain artists, critics, or curators based on a sense of intellectual or moral superiority towards what you might call classic documentary photography. Photos that emerge straight from reality without additional intervention. Photos that tell a story through what they depict, thanks to their intrinsic visual quality, rather than through a statement next to the work in an exhibition. Over conceptualization annoys me. A good photograph needs little or no explanation.
In the internet age of aesthetic perfection, where we are right now, at all costs, how much honesty in spontaneous act is being sacrificed over conventional beauty?
That's a problem. The technical possibilities, especially in post production, make it very tempting to make a photo or a person look perfect. And the danger is that a photo loses its uniqueness and instead takes on an interchangeable generic aesthetic. Imperfection is part of the surprising, spontaneous, uncontrolled nature of street photography and documentary photography.
Some say that to stand out in photography, a photographer must have a very recognizable style. Have you ever felt like you were repeating yourself and not reinventing yourself?
Yes, at a certain point, I was using the same strategy too often to compose an image. First, I was looking for a background, and then I combined it with whatever human activity I could find to fill up the foreground. And it became a trick. It's crucial to recognize your own blind spots and your ingrained habits so that you can rethink your approach.
Do you think a contemporary documentary photography is becoming too cautious, politically correct, or visually restrained?
There has been an increase in self censorship in recent years. A criticism on documentary photography, on photojournalism, and especially on conflict photography often comes from the photographic community and the artistic world itself. The critique concerns unequal power relations between the photographer and the subjects, or it questions whether, as a photographer, you still have the right to create work in a country or a culture that is not your own. I think it's sad to see that it's often the photographers and artists themselves who undermine the legitimacy and the unique power of their own medium. But don't get me wrong, I mean, abuse exists, and it's important as photographers to be aware of our privileges, our prejudices as well, our responsibilities, and to be empathic and understanding towards the other. But we should not allow ourselves to feel this misplaced guilt because we make photographs. Photography is a peaceful activity.
And to conclude on these topics, is there a risk for long term documentary projects to lose urgency in favor of institutional approval?
I don't need anyone's approval when I want to start a new project. Yes, I do sometimes need access and permits, which can be hard and frustrating. For example, in Dubai or in the new capital of Indonesia, where I recently went to make photographs. But a difficult access has also advantages because it discourages many other photographers.
Do you actually think that today is possible to live off photography without diluting someone's personal work?
I think only a minority is able to make a living from their own artistic projects only. Most of my colleagues have another job alongside their own projects, either in photography or elsewhere. And that's not a problem. Sometimes it's even refreshing to just carry out an assignment that you didn't have to develop entirely yourself. The difficulty lies in finding the right balance between your own work and paid work to earn a living. You need a lot of self discipline to avoid neglecting your own work in favor of assignments that bring in more money.
Do you see teaching, commissions, institutional collaborations as a necessity to live off photography or as a natural extension of the practice?
There are these three things together. My main income comes from teaching. It's a financial necessity. And what I earn from photography is invested in new projects, in travels, in equipment. It's not sufficient to live off. But I find teaching fascinating because it forces me to stay sharp, to reflect on the students' work, and therefore also on my own work, to immerse myself in the world of the younger generation, and to stay up to date with what's going on in the world of photography. I learn a lot from teaching, but it's also a compromise because it takes away time and energy from my own practice.
Where do you personally draw the line between financial necessity and artistic integrity?
My own projects always take priority, even if they are the least lucrative. And if an interesting assignment comes along, I will gratefully accept it. But I will never work for organizations or companies that go against my own values, such as oil companies, any polluting industries, or meat industry, or anything that smells of reactionary and right wing ideology.
If you were starting from zero today, would you still make the same choices in terms of career path and photography genre?
Realizing big projects is always a struggle involving a lot of stress and frustration. And sometimes I wonder, why am I doing this? Does this really make me happy? But then when a book is finished and when the exhibition opens, I know I made the right choices. Photography is a fantastic activity for curious people. It takes me to places I would otherwise never go and to people I would otherwise never meet. It gives meaning to my life and it intensifies the journeys I make.
Now, to conclude this interview, I want to explore a little bit the limited edition book Mirage that we're doing with Nick Annis, available for pre order until March 31st. And the very first question I want Nick to answer is, what is the common thread that we can find in Mirage?
Mirage contains photographs from four major book projects that I have published in the past 15 years. Photographs from the former Soviet Union, from the Mediterranean region, from Dubai, and also from the new capitals that are being built from scratch all over the world. The narrative is loosely structured around the concept of the neoliberal city, where people are reduced to consumers, where culture is replaced by entertainment, where security and control have become an obsession, where the human scale of a city is sacrificed for prestigious architecture, resulting in growing social segregation and ecological damage. This all sounds rather dramatic, but there's a lot of humor in my photography. The figurative meaning of mirage is something that appears to be real, but is actually an illusion. I found that definition very suitable for this urban model in which people seem to turn away their head from reality in order to escape into a glittering dream world of shopping malls, cruise ships, and entertainment.
And if you could live one line to those opening that will open the book, what line would you like them to read?
One phrase: the magic of photography lies in chance.
Lastly, what is exactly the message you aim to convey with Mirage in your photography?
I already mentioned my own motivation, and I don't want people to push in a certain way of thinking when they open up this book or any other book of mine. I do hope, however, that some of these photos um, will make people think about how we are treating our planet and each other. If photography can be a call for self reflection or a mirror, then I think that's quite something. And equally important is the documentary value of this kind of photography. It's valuable as visual historiography, as a document of what once was. That's the reason why we enjoy looking at old photographs. They are the witness of the past.
So, Nick, thank you again for being with us and for taking the time to talk. We're very happy and we hope we made you feel comfortable as much as we felt comfortable. And I just want to remember all our viewers to keep liking, keep subscribing, and keep commenting because what's just one small click to you means the world for us. And don't forget to pre order Mirage before March 31st.